In 1968, a protest by Ford sewing machinists against their pay and grading brought car production to a halt across Ford UK.
It frightened them, really did, didn't it, that strike?
Well, we didn't think we were that strong.
We didn't think we would bring Fords to a standstill.
The machinists' strike was to have far-reaching consequences. These skilled workers were challenging the dominant idea of the time, that women should automatically earn less than men because only men were breadwinners.
It was quite common for there to be separate lower women's rates of pay. So at Ford they had a skilled male rate, a semi-skilled male rate, an unskilled male rate, and the women's rate, which was lower than any of the male rates.
The striking Ford machinists were invited to meet the most powerful woman in government, Barbara Castle. She persuaded her cabinet colleagues it was time to make the women's rate illegal.
The government has decided to introduce legislation on equal pay during the coming session of Parliament.
When men have to forego some of their wage increases, which they would otherwise have got,
men realise they can't go on. They really can't go on indefinitely. Saying that a woman working beside them doing pretty nearly identical work should get 80% of their rate, it just is one of those outrages against human justice that can't endure, and I think men have got to take that on board.
But nearly 40 years since the Equal Pay Act was passed, people are still lobbying the government on equal pay.
We've won equal pay for the same work, but we haven't won equal pay for work of equal value for women. So many of women's jobs that are different but of equal worth to men's jobs are not being paid at the rate they should be.
Women still only earn 88 pence for every pound that a man earns. And if a woman works part-time, the gender pay gap is 40%. Equal pay is as live an issue now as it was 37 years ago when the Equal Pay Act was passed.
In the ferment of socialist and feminist ideas that started the 20th century, equal pay had its advocates, few more vocal than the General Secretary of the National Federation of Women Workers, Mary MacArthur. Here addressing a demonstration in Trafalgar Square in support of striking box makers in South London. Equal pay became a pressing issue during the First World War, when over 1 million women were recruited to do men's work. In 1918, London was brought to a standstill by women transport workers demanding equal pay. But their gains were short-lived.
At the end of the war, basically, the women were thrown out, and there was huge unemployment. So that there was a huge backlash against women working.
But these Lancashire weavers, filmed in 1931, showed that there were always women who needed to work.
My father came out of the mining industry shortly after the 26 strike because he felt that he was being discriminated against. He wouldn't get promotion. My mother, who had been a weaver, went back to work. Weavers were reasonably well paid, and she was the mainstay of the family. So I grew up with a woman, breadwinner.
I mean, despite the fact that there always have been women who've had to support themselves, have had to support families, there was this absolute attitude that women's work was never that of the breadwinner. It was pin money, it was to make up the wages.
But there have always been women taking action for more money.
there was this huge push to encourage and help women to work. It's when part-time work really came into being. The government did actually open nurseries to enable married women with children to work. So women workers were really valued.
My firm's always made a point of not employing women. They said a man should be paid enough to keep a wife and family in comfort. All that's changed now. Temporarily, there's a worthwhile job for women folk at the same basic rate of pay as men. 1,000 women and over 1,000 youths between 14 and 18 are carrying on the good work until the men come back.
At least 2 million women went into industry, and women's trade union membership soared. It wasn't to last.
The sentiment of the time was that women had been doing these jobs while the boys were away, and now they should give up the jobs and let the boys come back and take them, and they would become housewives and mothers again. And that went on throughout the 50s.
Within days of becoming a full-time officer at the Society of Civil Servants, I was out on the streets of Trafalgar Square collecting signatures for a petition to 10 Downing Street for equal pay for women. In those days, women were doing exactly the same jobs as men. I mean, I represented executive grades, and a woman executive officer was doing exactly the same job as a male executive officer, but was only getting 2/3 of his pay.
Women civil servants had had their case for equal pay acknowledged by Parliament as far back as 1921, but successive governments had declined to pay. In 1951, when the government yet again said it couldn't afford it, the civil service unions erupted.
When the Chancellor of the Exchequer left his Westminster home on Budget Day, there was a strong demand by equal pay pickets, as you see. Mr. Butler consented to say a few
Conservative Chancellor Rab Butler's government had reneged on an election promise to enact equal pay in the civil service. The unions didn't let him forget it.
There was a group in Bristol who printed something like 20,000 stickers saying equal pay when, and stuck them on cards and sent them to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer and their MPs every 2 weeks, so they were just bombarded.
There was no question in those days of strike action or anything like that. Civil service unions in those days were very respectable.
This film was produced by an organisation called the Equal Pay Coordinating Committee at the start of the civil service campaign. They got it shown in cinemas across the country.
For a woman in a job in 20th century Britain is still made to feel inferior. She's not paid the rate for the job. The postwoman gets almost £1 a week less than the postman. Schoolmasters are finding it increasingly difficult to make ends meet. But what about the schoolmistress? She gets less than her opposite number. For women are cheap labour.
After 4 years of vigorous campaigning, the civil service unions prevailed on Rab Butler in 1955.
And I always think it's to the shame of the Labour movement that they left it to a Conservative Chancellor to concede such an important point.
In 1966, the BBC made a film about women working in a cigarette factory in Nottingham. These women did exactly the same jobs for years on end, though shop steward Irene Fowler had volunteered for training in the hope of getting off the line.
Since having done this day release course, that the 3 men who were working in the industry have been given promotion, but of course, me being a woman, hasn't even been mentioned to me any type of promotion whatsoever.
I think we've forgotten how woeful the position was for women. Women were doing jobs that were often with very few skills, or if they had skills, they weren't being rewarded. They were considered unable to do difficult jobs. And I think it was very, very stifling for a lot of women.
You sit and think, oh, what could I have done? You realise that you have been robbed. You know, you're just sitting there doing this grinding, repetitive job and knowing full well that there's no hopes of any promotion whatsoever. Fellow members, I've maintained all through my association with the trade union movement that we do want equal pay, but also we want equal opportunities.
It wasn't taking account of what women could do and what they did do, their value within the place of work. And so the women across the whole spread of British industry was in the same position.
I think it's a disgusting state of affairs.
In every section of industry, there were women who were getting less pay than men, even though they had what we called inherent skills.
And that's it.
We were campaigning for an Act of Parliament which fulfilled the desires and the ambitions of women to get equality in pay.
By the mid-1960s, a Labour government was in power, led by Harold Wilson. They had a manifesto commitment to legislate for equal pay.
I was a national women's organiser, and we'd had many commitments in the party and the TUC, giving lip service to it, and then we managed to get it as part of policy and into the manifesto.
The government is having talks with the CBI and the TUC, and we want to be in a position to implement equal pay when economic circumstances make this possible.
But the government's position on economic circumstances was forced to change when the Ford sewing machinists walked out and stayed out.
Do any of you have any don'ts at all now?
None of the girls have got any doubts at all.
We deeply regret all the men that's been put off through our cause, but the quicker they get down and do something and give us what we want, we'll get back to work and give them all they want.
Thank you very much.
Are you going to give us some money?
It was what provoked Barbara Castle into recognising that it really was necessary for the government to introduce equal pay legislation.
Barbara Castle was loudly applauded when she made the big announcement of the day that equal pay for women would be the law of the land by 1975.
I mean, anyone who thought that the employers were just going to roll over in 1975 and say, oh, yeah, of course, but why didn't we do it before? That wasn't the way of things. We knew we were going to have a struggle and a fight on our hands.
But the struggle was also about culture. Marion Thomas, a shop steward in the Potteries, was filmed during the gap between the Equal Pay Act being passed in 1970 and its coming into force 5 years later. These women were decorating between 80 and 100 dozen items a day just to qualify for their basic rate. But they were still earning less than any man on the shop floor, including labourers. Nonetheless, the shop steward was finding it hard to enthuse the women about equal pay.
Some women are against equal pay because they don't want to earn as much as their husbands are earning. They don't realise that they're going out to work to help to run their home, and they might as well go out for a big wage as a small wage.
I don't think women should have equal pay. Even though they're doing less skilled jobs, I do think a man ought to have more money. I think it belittles a man for bringing less wages in than his wife.
A man is superior to a woman. There's more clever men than clever women. The man is the breadwinner of any family, by rights. His name's on the rent book. If anything goes wrong, he's persecuted. A man should earn more than a woman, otherwise there's a conflict straight away.
In the traditional area of the potteries, it was considered that men were the breadwinners and that women were just doing it for pin money. It wasn't considered to be important or serious for women to work, although, of course, the whole industry depended on women.
Evening all.
Marion Thomas's union branch met after work, at a time most women were at home cooking their husband's dinner.
Have your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Women were the majority in the workforce, but the minority in the branch. Though Marion and others were trying to change this.
Our union is male-dominated, and we thought we were going to break in. But this was 6 years ago, and we still haven't broken in.
I think that this is in the makeup of women, the natural makeup of women, that they don't want to take part. It's not a question of opportunity or equal opportunity. It is simply that women do not want to take part in trade union matters.
But a new force was challenging the culture of male domination.
There was a very radical feeling around. I mean, it was very exciting. Everybody felt that somehow things were changing and that they could be changed. It was a period when people went to conferences every weekend. I mean, there was tremendous activity amongst women.
In the beginning, the women's movement had a very strong focus on work, on pay, and job opportunities. There were lots of committed women in unions who took it up. We took resolutions to conferences. We all tried to get women's committees set up in our unions. I mean, we worked really, really hard.
Go on, strike! Right.
This theatre performance, filmed for a trade union studies programme on television, showed the kind of agitprop work union activists were doing.
And we call that parity, love. That's what we're after. Oh, it's only fair, ain't it? It's only fair.
I'm still not getting as much as Mike, and I'm doing the same work.
That's because you're on a woman's rate, dear. You're on a woman's wage, love. You wouldn't get as much, would you? No. Oh, dear.
Oh, I think I've got it.
That's it, love.
That means I should go on strike for parity with Mike.
We campaigned in our unions and our conferences, and there were very few unions who didn't respond to that. Some didn't. These were the old guards of the male-orientated unions, and so they were dragged along by their bootstraps, really.
We've got to take action now if we're ever going to get anywhere, and we're asking you to support us in this fight.
One at a time, lads. Over here, brother. I'll take your point, love, but what you women don't seem to realise is the reason a man gets more than a woman is because he's got a family to support. He's not in it just for a bit of extra, bit of pin money. No, to be quite honest with you, love, I don't believe in equal pay.
But on the ground, women were getting active in trade unions because of equal pay. This strike in Salford happened because the employer refused to negotiate on equal pay with the clerical workers' union, Apex.
I'd never even considered being in a union, and if anybody had suggested to me that I would ever go on strike, well, I would have been very, very annoyed with them, because I'm not the person to strike.
And in West London, women at Trico gained their union's support for their equal pay struggle.
The men produce exactly the same amount of work as the women, and yet they take home between £5 and £6 a week more than what the woman does.
The legislation was empowering for women. It gave them a sense that they had a right to equal pay.
I think the biggest impact on women trade union membership was the way the TUC and the respective unions, the affiliates, took the stand on behalf of women. Because if you say to somebody, well, come and join us, they say, why? What for? When the Equal Pay Act came on statute in 1970, my union determined they weren't going to wait till 1975. They were going to put things in place now. We had broad agreement in the Employers' Federation. And so, with each company, we drew a new structure. job evaluation to deal with equal pay. We could do that because the union was 100% organised, almost. 60% of the membership were women, 40% were men, and therefore the union already had that power. It was quite amazing. We lifted masses of women into the higher grades, spread them through the grades, because before then, the women were all down here. It didn't matter what they did, with few exceptions, they were all down there.
But the way the Equal Pay Act was framed made it easy for employers to dodge it. Women had to be doing broadly similar jobs to men, but most